I never imagined my life would unravel the way it did. Just a year ago, I was a content husband, a mid-level executive at a tech firm, living in a comfortable suburb with my wife, Julia, and our 12-year-old daughter, Zoe. I considered myself a lucky man. I had a wife I adored, a stable career, and a cozy home in the Pacific Northwest. We weren't perfect, no marriage is, but I trusted Julia completely. She was smart, ambitious, and charming, a project manager at a financial services company. We often joked that between my software industry jargon and her finance talk, our dinner conversations could bore anyone but us. Lately, though, an uneasy feeling had settled over me. It was hard to pinpoint how it started. Perhaps it was the small changes. Julia had become more protective of her phone, angling the screen away when texting and setting a new password without telling me. She started working later hours and mentioned more frequent business trips. At first, I chalked it up to her vying for a promotion. She had always been career-driven, and I admired that about her. But one crisp October evening, that uneasy feeling sharpened into suspicion. We were cleaning up after dinner. Zoe had gone upstairs to finish homework, and I was washing dishes as Julia dried. Her phone buzzed on the counter, lighting up with a message. Reflexively, I glanced over and saw a name I didn't recognize. Eric. The preview of the text disappeared as quickly as it came, but I caught a glimpse of words that made my stomach tighten. "Can't wait to see you again." "Who's Eric?" I asked as casually as I could manage, trying to keep my voice even. Julia's hand froze mid-wipe on a plate. She didn't meet my eyes. "Oh," she said after the slightest pause, resuming her motions. "Just a coworker. He's in my new project team. We're coordinating on a client account." Her explanation sounded plausible enough, but something in her tone was off. It was too airy, too rehearsed, and she still wouldn't look at me. I felt a prickle of dread. I tried to sound unconcerned. "He must be eager about work if he's messaging you at night." She shrugged, finally setting the plate aside. "The client presentation is coming up, you know? Everyone's on edge. I told you how Jenkins is on our case." Jenkins was her boss, a name I had heard plenty. She offered me a brief smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and changed the subject. "So, Zoe's math teacher called today. She thinks Zoe might need a tutor to keep up with algebra. What do you think?" Her pivot was abrupt. Under normal circumstances, I would have teased her for her short attention span. But now I recognized it as a tactic. She was deflecting. I decided not to press further about the text. Not then. Instead, I nodded and murmured something about looking into tutors. All the while, an anxious swirl churned in my gut. That night, Julia fell asleep instantly, as though nothing were amiss. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. The name Eric looped in my mind. I mentally combed through everything Julia had mentioned about work recently. She rarely talked about any Eric. She'd spoken plenty about her boss, Jenkins, and a few female colleagues she lunched with. But Eric was new. Maybe he was a recent hire, I reasoned. Yet why hadn't she mentioned him casually if they were working closely? I reminded myself that a single vague text wasn't proof of anything. It could genuinely be work-related. Or perhaps I misread it. I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to believe that. But I couldn't ignore how uneasy Julia had seemed. Normally, she'd tease me for snooping if I peeked at her phone, then show me the text without hesitation. This time, she hadn't even offered. My rational side scolded me. "Don't jump to conclusions, Dan. We'd been married 12 years. We had weathered stressful times before. She'd always been faithful, at least as far as I knew, and I prided myself on trusting her. Accusing your spouse over one suspicious text could do serious damage if you're wrong. I decided I needed more information before drawing any conclusions. Maybe I was being paranoid. I resolved to pay closer attention, quietly, and not mention Eric again until I had a better grasp of who he was. Over the next few weeks, I kept my promise to myself and observed. I felt a bit guilty. Spying on your wife, even in little ways, isn't something you ever plan on when you say, "I do." But my intuition kept gnawing at me, and unfortunately, the more I watched, the more the signs piled up. For one, Julia's work travel had indeed spiked. She flew to Chicago for 3 days in late October for a client workshop. 2 weeks later, it was a conference in San Francisco over a long weekend. She'd always had occasional business trips, but 2 in the span of a month was new. When I casually asked why I couldn't find the San Francisco conference on her company's website events list, she claimed it was a last-minute invitation-only seminar for select employees. Maybe that was true. Her firm sometimes sent high performers to exclusive industry summits. Still, something didn't sit right with me. I offered to drive her to the airport for San Francisco, but she insisted on leaving her car at work and carpooling with a colleague to the airport. That colleague, she said, was Marissa, one of her teammates I'd met at a holiday party. Trying to be helpful, I suggested, "I can pick you up when you get back Sunday night. Save Marissa the trouble." Julia quickly declined, saying Marissa's husband was picking them both up to make things easier. It might have made sense, or it might have been another deflection. After she left for that trip, I found myself pacing the living room, unsettled. On a hunch, I texted Marissa's husband, with whom I was vaguely friendly since the last company Christmas event. I framed it as a casual inquiry. "Hey, hope you're well. Julia mentioned you were picking her and Marissa up Sunday from the airport. I'll gladly do it if it's any hassle for you." His answer came within minutes. "Hey Dan, actually, Marissa's out of town visiting her sister this weekend. Maybe you misheard. I'm not picking anyone up. Everything okay?" I stared at the glowing screen, feeling my pulse in my throat. Marissa was out of town? That meant Julia had straight up lied about traveling with her. My thumb hovered over the screen as I struggled to think of a reply. Finally, I typed, "No worries, probably my mistake. Thanks anyway," and forced myself to hit send. My heart was hammering. I realized I was now holding evidence, tiny digital evidence, that my wife was not where she said she'd be, or at least not with whom she said. I wanted to call her right that second and demand an explanation, but she was likely mid-flight or already in San Francisco, and part of me was terrified of what I'd hear if I confronted her unprepared. I needed to know more first. That weekend was one of the longest of my life. While Julia was away, presumably at her conference, I oscillated between fury, panic, and profound sadness. I took Zoe to the movies to distract myself, but I barely registered the film. Every time my phone buzzed, I snatched it up, half hoping it was Julia checking in, half dreading it. She texted only twice, once to say she'd landed, and once more on Saturday night with a brief, "All good here, busy day, heading to bed early. Love you." I stared at that message for a long time. Love you. The words that once made me feel warm now felt hollow, possibly even calculated to keep me unsuspecting. By the time Sunday night rolled around, I was wound tight with anxiety. Julia had said she'd catch a ride home. I heard the garage door open around 9 p.m. I was in the kitchen pretending to read emails on my laptop, though in truth I hadn't gotten any real work done all weekend. Zoe was already asleep. Julia breezed in with her carry-on rolling behind her. She looked a bit tired but cheerful. I got up to greet her, our well-practiced routine. I forced a smile and gave her a hug, inhaling the scent of her perfume mixed with the stale air of airports. For a fleeting moment, I wished desperately that everything was normal, that her smile was genuine, and I was just a foolish, paranoid husband. "How was San Francisco?" I asked, pulling back to search her face. She launched into an explanation about workshops and networking events, speaking quickly as she hung her coat. Something about a great speaker and lots of new insights for her client strategy. She was animated, maybe a bit too animated, overselling it. I watched her closely, looking for any sign of guilt or nervousness, but she was hard to read. Julia had always been good at maintaining a polished demeanor. It was part of what made her excel in corporate settings. I decided to test her story. "It's funny, I ran into Kevin, Marissa's husband, at the grocery store." I lied, keeping my tone light. "He mentioned Marissa was visiting her sister this weekend. I guess you didn't end up carpooling with her to the conference after all." Julia's movements faltered just enough for me to notice. Her hand froze on the handle of her suitcase for a split second. Then she resumed, expression hardly changing. "Oh, right," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Small mix-up. Marissa was supposed to go, but she got called away. Family emergency. I should have told you, my bad. I actually went with a different coworker last minute. It was a scramble. Jenkins asked me to fill in for Marissa at the sister conference track." She sighed as if remembering a chaotic travel shuffle, then flashed me a quick smile. "But hey, it all worked out. I learned a lot. I'm exhausted, though. Rain check on the full download. I need a shower and then bed." I nodded slowly, my face a mask of neutrality while my insides churned. There was an ease to her fib that was chilling. How many lies had she told me by now with that same casual grace? "Sure," I said quietly. "We can talk tomorrow. Glad it went well." I watched her roll her suitcase towards our bedroom, feeling a mix of anger and heartbreak. She had just glibly lied to my face again, and I'd let her, pretending to accept it. That night, after her shower, she climbed into bed and was asleep within minutes, or at least pretending to be. I lay beside her in the dark, grappling with the reality I could no longer deny. Julia was hiding something big, and it smelled an awful lot like an affair. A part of me wanted to shake her awake and lay it all out. "I know you're lying. I know Marissa wasn't with you. Who were you really with?" But I bit my tongue. I needed proof, real proof of whatever was going on. Otherwise, I feared, she'd just spin another lie or accuse me of mistrust or paranoia. She might even turn it around on me, making me into the bad guy for not believing her. No, I had to be smart. Staring at the ceiling, I felt a steely resolve hardening within me, alongside the hurt. However deep this betrayal went, I would uncover it. And if my worst fears were true, that Julia was having an affair, I wouldn't be a complacent victim. I would make sure there were consequences. I woke up the next day with a grim sense of purpose. Gone was any illusion that I might be overthinking this. Julia's lies about her trip made it painfully clear that something was very wrong. If she wouldn't tell me the truth, I would have to find it myself. Monday morning, after Julia and I got ready for work in near silence, I watched her drive off with a tightness in my chest. I had barely slept, but adrenaline and anger kept me going. After dropping Zoe at school, I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot, turned off the engine, and began my search for answers. First, I logged into our cell phone provider's online account. We shared a family plan, and with a few clicks, I accessed the call and text logs for Julia's number. My hands trembled slightly on the keyboard. I wasn't sure what I dreaded more, finding confirmation of my fears, or finding nothing and being back in the dark. The page loaded, and a list of recent call activity appeared, stretching back weeks. I immediately noticed an outlier. One number, unfamiliar to me, appeared repeatedly, often late at night or during times I knew I wasn't home. It wasn't a saved contact in our account, just a 10-digit number. I clicked over to the text message log and saw the same number over and over, almost daily. Some days had a dozen texts back and forth with that number, frequently during work hours and again late at night. The earliest appearance of this number went back about 10 months. My heart sank. 10 months. If this was Eric's number, and I was almost certain it was, then whatever was happening had been going on for nearly a year. I scribbled the number down in my notebook, then did a quick reverse phone lookup on Google. It came up blank for public listings, which wasn't surprising for a cell. I tried a different approach. I remembered that Julia had once shown me her team's page on her company's internal directory when she got a new hire. I recalled seeing a list of names in her department. If I could access that, perhaps through LinkedIn or the company website, I might find an Eric. A quick search on LinkedIn for her company plus the name Eric yielded a few results. I struck gold on the second try. Eric Sanders, Senior Client Manager at Crest Hill Financial, Julia's firm. His profile picture showed a man in his 40s with a confident smile, silvering hair at the temples. The profile boasted a 15-year tenure at the company. His job title suggested he was in management, possibly even above Julia's level. A click on his profile connections led me to Julia's profile. They weren't first-degree connections, likely because they kept things discreet online, but they had many mutual colleagues. My pulse quickened. I strongly suspected this was the Eric, and if he was a senior manager, he might even be a superior of hers. The thought made my skin crawl. Was she sleeping with her boss, or at least a higher up? It added another layer of ugliness. Not just infidelity, but possible power dynamics at her workplace. I suddenly recalled her mentioning Jenkins complaining about the team. Was Jenkins actually Eric Jenkins? Could it be the same person? A quick glance at Eric's profile didn't list his middle name or any alias, but Julia had always referred to her boss as Jenkins, maybe out of formality. If Jenkins was indeed this Eric's last name or vice versa, it would mean she'd been talking about him regularly while hiding that first-name basis in texts. My head spun with possibilities. Either way, Eric Sanders, or Jenkins, whoever he was, seemed likely to be the man messaging my wife late at night about, "Can't wait to see you again." I sat there for a long moment in the car, the coffee going cold, as a slow anger began to burn through my veins. How could she do this? And how could he, if he was her boss, so brazenly carry on with a married subordinate? The audacity, the disrespect, it made me livid. Still, I reminded myself, I needed more than phone logs and LinkedIn hunches. Those would mean nothing if I confronted her or in any legal setting. I needed concrete evidence, pictures, recordings, something undeniable. That evening, I set a small trap. Julia had mentioned earlier in the week that she might have to stay late for an end-of-quarter report. She hadn't confirmed which night, but I suspected it would be soon. On Tuesday, around 4 p.m., I texted her, "Hey, thinking of making steak tonight. You home for dinner or working late?" It took her nearly 10 minutes to respond. Finally, a text came. "Sorry, forgot to say, need to stay late tonight. Don't wait up. I'll grab something at the office. Love you." There was that word again, love. It felt like she was using it as a shield, a way to keep me off the scent. My jaw tightened. If my suspicions were correct, she wasn't staying late at the office at all. I decided to verify. After picking up Zoe from her after-school club and dropping her at my sister's house for a sleepover with her cousins, I told Zoe it was a fun midweek treat, and thankfully she was thrilled. I drove towards Julia's office downtown. By 7:30 p.m., I was parked on a side street adjacent to the tall glass building that housed Crest Hill Financial. Most of the windows were dark at this hour. Julia's team worked on the 5th floor, if I recalled correctly. I scanned the lit windows. Only a few offices had lights on. The parking garage entrance was around the block, so I strolled that way, trying to look casual. I felt a bit ridiculous, like some skulking detective in my own marriage, but my nerves were jangling. Sure enough, as I neared the garage, I spotted Julia's car in the visitor lot outside. It was hard to miss her red Audi. It was parked in a far corner, not in the employee garage. That was odd. If she was working late, why not park inside the building's garage as usual? Maybe the garage was closed after hours without security. Or maybe she'd moved her car for some reason. I snapped a quick photo of her license plate with my phone, heart pounding as if I needed proof of what my own eyes told me. I reminded myself to be patient. It would do me no good to storm into the building. If she was truly meeting someone, I wanted to catch them red-handed. I retreated to my car, which had a good vantage point of the exit from the side lot. I turned off my lights and waited. The autumn night was rainy, a light drizzle on my windshield. Each minute felt interminable. My mind conjured images of what might be happening inside that building after hours. My wife and this man together in some conference room, or sneaking out the back door. I clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. Just past 8 p.m., I saw movement. 2 figures emerged from a side door of the building, hurrying through the drizzle toward the lot. Under the yellow glow of a street lamp, I recognized Julia's blue trench coat, and beside her, a man in a suit with silver at his temples. Even from a distance, I could tell they were talking and laughing quietly. Julia glanced around. I slunk lower in my seat, heart thudding, and then the man put a hand on the small of her back as they walked. The gesture was casual, familiar, intimate. I struggled to steady my hand as I raised my phone and zoomed in, snapping a few photos through the windshield. They headed to her Audi. The man, who had to be Eric, opened the driver's door for her. Before she got in, she leaned up and kissed him. A brief peck on the lips, but enough for me to see even in the dim light. He said something, she laughed, and then she got into her car. He closed her door, tapped the roof lightly in a "see you later" gesture, and then turned and walked off towards the garage, likely where his own car was. I sat there in a stunned haze as Julia's Audi backed out. She drove right past me onto the street, heading in the direction of our home. My hands were icy on the steering wheel. Despite all my suspicions, seeing the proof in living color was a body blow. My wife had just kissed another man. She'd been in his company, not working, while telling me she was at the office. I waited until Eric's BMW, a dark shape that exited the garage a minute later, had passed and gone before I started my own car and followed at a distance. I wasn't even sure why I followed him. Maybe some instinct to gather anything I could. I made sure to stay several car lengths back, mindful of the sparse traffic at this hour. He drove a short distance to a nearby upscale apartment complex, pulling into the secured parking area. Of course, if they were meeting at the office after hours, perhaps they used that as neutral ground. Or maybe earlier they had been elsewhere and just returned to her office to make it look like she'd been there. I took a photo of the apartment building's sign and address. It might be useful, I thought dimly, trying to operate in a logical mode even as emotions threatened to overwhelm me. On the drive home, I felt numb. Somehow I managed not to burst into the house and confront Julia immediately. When I walked in, she was in the kitchen, freshly changed into sweatpants, reheating a bowl of soup. She looked up and gave me a tired smile. "Hey, you're home later than I expected. How was your evening?" How she could act so normal, so innocent, was beyond me. I forced myself to shrug. Dropped Zoe at my sister's for a cousin's sleepover. Figured I'd give you a quiet night since you were busy. Then I went for a drive to clear my head after work. That last part, at least, wasn't a lie. My head definitely needed clearing. Julia stepped closer, concern flickering over her face. "You okay? Work stress?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. Work stress. She had no idea I'd just watched her kiss another man less than an hour ago. I felt a flash of something almost like dark humor, that I could have such damning knowledge while she stood here clueless that I knew. That humor quickly curdled back into anger. "I'm fine," I managed. "Just a long day. And I missed you." That part slipped out involuntarily, a shard of my hurt showing. Because I had missed her, or at least the person I thought she was, even as I stalked her through the city tonight. Her eyes softened a bit, and for a second I thought I saw guilt in her expression. Maybe my imagination. She leaned in and gave me a hug. I stiffened automatically before forcing myself to relax and pat her back. She felt like a stranger in my arms. Or maybe I was the stranger now, hiding my secret knowledge. We didn't talk much more that night. She was exhausted, from what I thought bitterly, and turned in early. I stayed up, pouring a whiskey and staring at the photos on my phone. Images of my wife with another man. Proof. It was amazing how quickly love could turn to something else. The heartbreak was there, certainly, but overriding it now was anger. White-hot anger, but tempered by a cold clarity. Cheating on me was bad enough, but doing it repeatedly for months, lying to my face, deceiving our child, risking everything we built, that was a conscious choice she made over and over. And this Eric, carrying on with a married woman who was his co-worker, possibly his subordinate, he was equally culpable. They both thought they could make a fool of me. They thought they could live this double life and I'd be none the wiser. I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, a plan formulating in my mind. If I confronted her now, in anger, it would be satisfying for a moment but ultimately tip my hand. She might cry, apologize, or she might turn hostile. Who knew? But one thing was certain. She and Eric would then work together to cover their tracks. She'd delete evidence. They'd concoct stories. The advantage I had now was the element of surprise and knowledge. No, I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I needed to secure more evidence, prepare legally, and figure out exactly how to make them pay for this. If that sounds cold, it's because something inside me had turned cold. The part of me that still loved her was battered and bleeding, but a new part, forged in betrayal, was hardening with resolve. The next morning, during a break at work, I made 2 important phone calls. The first was to a private investigator, a man named Frank who came recommended by a colleague of mine who had gone through a messy divorce last year. My colleague had suspected his wife of cheating and, as awkward as it was, I'd reached out to him late last night for advice. He sympathized and passed along Frank's contact info, praising the PI's thoroughness. When I spoke to Frank, I was concise. I gave him Julia's name, workplace, Eric's name and likely workplace relationship, and the basics of what I'd observed. He agreed to meet me that afternoon to discuss a plan. He'd tail them discreetly, gather photographic evidence, whatever was needed. His voice was calm, professional, which gave me some confidence that this betrayal I was dealing with was sadly routine in his line of work. My second call was to a divorce attorney. Saying those words, divorce attorney, left me shaking a little, but I knew I had to be prepared. The attorney, Marjorie Green, had excellent reviews and specialized in high-asset divorces and cases involving infidelity. I set an appointment for later in the week. Even if I hadn't made the ultimate decision to end my marriage, I needed to know my options and how to protect myself and Zoe. Meeting Frank that afternoon felt surreal. We sat in a small diner where the din of lunch conversations provided cover for our discussion. I slid him an envelope with a recent photo of Julia and her car details, and a separate paper with Eric's info and the address of the apartment building I'd followed him to. Frank was a stout, middle-aged man with a kindly face, which oddly put me at ease. He asked a few pointed questions. Did I think Julia suspected anything? I doubted it. I'd been playing the oblivious husband well. Did I have specific times they usually met? I only knew about the one night so far and her trips. I told him about the Chicago and San Francisco trips that seemed suspicious, and the after-hours meet I witnessed. He gave a slight nod. If they've been at it that long, they'll have a routine. I'll find it. Before we parted, I told him one more thing. I want this to be completely confidential, and I need evidence that will hold up in court if necessary. Frank met my eyes and said gently but firmly, Dan, I only operate within legal bounds. You're doing the right thing hiring a PI rather than trying to do it all yourself. We'll get you what you need. It struck me that he'd probably seen many versions of me sitting in that booth, betrayed, angry spouses desperate for answers. It was not a club I ever wanted to join, but here I was. That week was torturous. Knowing a PI was tailing my wife felt strange, but also gave me a grim comfort that progress was being made. I went about my days trying to act normal. At home, I played the role of attentive husband, just enough not to arouse suspicion, while inwardly seething each time Julia sent a flurry of texts, no doubt to him, or claimed to be busy with work. I did notice one change in her. Perhaps my "I missed you" comment had struck a chord, because she started being a tad more attentive, asking about my day, giving me pecks on the cheek out of the blue. To an outsider, it might seem sweet, but to me it felt like crumbs thrown at a dog to keep it satisfied. Maybe she sensed something off in my demeanor, or perhaps guilt was motivating these small kindnesses. Regardless, it was far too little, far too late. By Friday, I had a follow-up with PI Frank. He'd hit the ground running. Over coffee in his office, he laid out what he'd found. It was worse than I imagined, yet exactly what I needed to hear. On Wednesday, during lunch, Julia and Eric had met up at a restaurant 2 blocks from her office. Frank had snapped photos of them in a secluded booth, leaning in close. From the images, it was obvious this was no mere colleague meeting, their heads together, her hand brushing his arm. Thursday evening, Julia told me she was going to a networking mixer. Frank trailed her as she left work and met Eric at a boutique hotel across town. They didn't even bother getting dinner. The two of them went straight inside, arm in arm, and didn't reappear for over 2 hours. Frank discreetly snapped shots of them entering the building and exiting later. Julia's hair was a bit disheveled, and both looked flushed. I clenched my fists under the table as he slid those photos over. One showed Eric's hand on Julia's lower back as they left the hotel lobby. Another caught a brief kiss as they parted and went to separate cars. "I'm sorry," Frank said quietly, as I stared at the evidence of my wife's betrayal. I managed a nod, swallowing the bile in my throat. He continued, I have date-stamped images and video snippets. Also, I checked that San Francisco conference last month. Crest Hill did have a conference, but it ended Saturday. Your wife stayed through Sunday, presumably with him. I can get hotel records if needed by subpoena, but given what we have, it might not be necessary unless your attorney advises. I took a deep breath, steadied by the PI's factual, measured approach. This was good. Painful, but good. Ironclad proof. My next stop was attorney Marjorie Green's office that afternoon. I came armed with a summary of what I knew and some printed copies of a few choice photos Frank provided. Marjorie was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who got down to brass tacks immediately. After I recounted everything and showed her the evidence, she nodded, her expression sympathetic but professional. In this state, adultery can be cited as fault in a divorce, she explained. It won't send anyone to jail, of course, but it can influence the division of property and alimony. And if marital funds were spent on the affair, we can make a case for reimbursement to the marital estate. She indicated one of the hotel photos. For example, hotel bills, trips, gifts. If you can show those were paid with joint accounts, a judge could credit that back to you in the asset split. Judges here don't look kindly on a spouse using community money to finance their affair. I recalled our credit card statements. Just last month, I'd seen a charge for an expensive jewelry store that I hadn't paid much attention to. Julia had claimed it was a birthday gift for her mother. In hindsight, that didn't add up. Her mom wasn't into jewelry that expensive. Now I wondered if that was something she bought for herself. Or worse, if Eric had given it to her and she covered by buying something so I wouldn't question a charge. I told Marjorie about it, and she made a note to subpoena those records if needed. What about custody of my daughter? I asked, my voice stiff. I want full custody. Julia can have visitation maybe, but I don't want Zoe's life destabilized. Marjorie steepled her fingers. Family court's priority is the best interest of the child. Adultery by itself doesn't disqualify someone from being a good parent, at least legally. However, if the affair impacted the child, like your wife neglecting her or exposing her to this man inappropriately, that could sway things. Did Zoe ever meet him, or was she ever left unattended due to these liaisons? I thought about it. Not that I know of. Julia's been pretty careful to do this on work time or when Zoe's at school or with me. Zoe hasn't mentioned anyone new or odd. My heart hurt thinking of my little girl. I'd tried to shield her from any sense of conflict. But I worry about the instability. If Julia's carrying on an affair and it blows up her job or her life, that affects Zoe. Marjorie nodded. We can certainly make a case, especially if your wife's affair leads to consequences like job loss. Judges can consider a parent's life stability in custody arrangements. If her affair becomes public and scandalous, that might indirectly support your case that you provide the more stable home environment. She gave me a small, wry smile. It sounds harsh, but you said you wanted to make them pay. That can include leveraging these facts for custody if that's your goal. It is, I affirmed, confidence growing. I would fight for my daughter. Before I left, I asked one more question that had been on my mind. I don't want to just quietly divorce and let them off easy. I want this known. Is there any risk if I say inform her workplace about what's going on? Marjorie raised an eyebrow. You mean tell her HR or boss? Well, if company policy forbids relationships between certain levels and she's violating that, it could indeed jeopardize her and the man's employment. Ethically, you're not forbidden from reporting it. Legally, There's no direct penalty on you for telling, as long as it's true and you're not slandering them with false info. Just be absolutely sure before you do anything. Though from what you've shown me, you are sure. I showed her a particularly clear photo of Julia and Eric entering that hotel, timestamp visible. I'm sure. She nodded. Then it's up to you. Some clients want to keep things quiet for the kids or to minimize drama. Others, well, they want a pound of flesh. If you want to go scorched earth, I'll support you in that strategy, within legal bounds. Legal bounds. I found myself almost smirking at that. I intended to remain within the law, yes, but I was more than willing to scorch the earth under their feet. Marjorie gave me some homework. Gather financial records, especially anything showing suspicious expenditures. Make a list of assets, and try to remain civil at home so as not to tip off Julia. The divorce filing, she said, could be done quickly once we decided on timing, and she could request a temporary order for custody and freezing assets if needed, given the circumstances. I left her office feeling more empowered than I had in weeks. I had allies now, and a plan taking shape. Driving home, I rehearsed normalcy in my mind, putting my mask back on. I would be the loving husband a bit longer. But it was only a matter of time. Julia and Eric had no idea of the storm that was about to rain down on them. I waited 2 more agonizing weeks to execute my plan. Those days were among the hardest I've ever lived through, pretending everything was fine with Julia while knowing what I knew, while planning what I was planning, took an almost theatrical effort. But I needed that time to get everything in order and to pick the perfect moment. During that period, I gathered every shred of evidence and documentation I might need. I combed through our financial records late at night, finding proof of what Marjorie called marital waste. There it was, a charge for a luxury hotel in Chicago, the same dates Julia was there for work back in September. An expensive jewelry purchase in August, definitely not for her mother, as she'd claimed, and numerous receipts for upscale restaurants. The kicker was a pair of first-class airfare tickets to San Francisco. I found the e-ticket copies in our email archive. She had booked through our joint frequent flyer account, perhaps thinking I wouldn't notice amidst other travel. The tickets were for the same flights, one under her name and one for E. Sanders. My hands shook with rage when I saw that. She had used our shared miles to fly her lover to San Francisco for their tryst, and hadn't even bothered to hide it well. I printed all of it and handed the stack to Marjorie, who smiled with thinly veiled satisfaction. "This will do nicely," she said. Meanwhile, I also learned through Frank, the PI, that Eric was indeed married. In fact, he had a wife of nearly 20 years and 2 teenage sons. Frank dug up that the apartment I saw him go to wasn't his main residence. It was likely a convenient crash pad he kept in the city, perhaps with a corporate excuse, to facilitate the affair. His actual home was in a wealthy suburb, and yes, he wore a wedding ring in his social media photos. No wonder I hadn't noticed it that rainy night from afar. This revelation somehow managed to disgust me further. The hypocrisy of that man, playing devoted husband and father in one life while carrying on with my wife in another, was astounding. In a way, it steeled my resolve even more. There were more victims of this affair than just me and Zoe. I decided that his wife deserved to know the truth as well. Using the intel Frank provided, I prepared an anonymous package to be sent to the Sanders household. Inside, I included a selection of damning photographs, him and Julia at the hotel, at the restaurant, even one of that kiss by her car, and a letter that succinctly explained the basics, that Eric was having a long-term affair with my wife, one of his co-workers. I wrote that I had evidence and thought she should know, from one betrayed spouse to another. I didn't sign it, of course. I planned for the package to be delivered on the same day I set everything else in motion. It was a cold move, perhaps, to drop that bomb on a stranger's life. I took no joy in hurting an innocent woman, but I knew if our positions were reversed, I would want to know. And in the back of my mind, I couldn't deny a grim satisfaction at the idea of Eric facing consequences at home, not just at work. As November rolled toward December, I chose my moment carefully. Crest Hill Financial's annual holiday party was scheduled for the first Friday of December. Spouses were invited, and ironically, Julia had already asked me to save the date weeks ago. The plan forming in my mind was bold. I would coordinate everything to hit them just before that event. The thought of facing them in a room full of their colleagues after their dirty laundry was aired out had a certain poetic justice to it. On the Monday of that week, I quietly filed the divorce petition with Marjorie, citing adultery as the cause and attaching a trove of evidence. We arranged for a process server to be ready. By Wednesday, I pulled the trigger on the coordinated strike. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I dressed in one of my best suits, a charcoal gray that I usually saved for important meetings or presentations. Looking in the mirror as I knotted my tie, I barely recognized the man staring back. There was a hardness in my eyes that hadn't been there a year ago, a determination edged with fury. Today's the day, I told myself. Over breakfast, Julia was cheery, even a bit nervous about the upcoming party on Friday. "You're still coming, right?" she asked with a bright smile. "I know these company things aren't your favorite, but it's at that new hotel downtown. It could be fun." I met her eyes and smiled back, a smile that would have looked genuine to her. "Of course. Wouldn't miss it," I lied smoothly. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, rather from the anticipation of what was to come. We parted ways as usual, she to her office, me to mine. But instead of going straight to work, I took a detour to a postal center and sent off the package to Eric's wife via overnight delivery, signature required. It would land on her doorstep by tomorrow. Next, I parked a few blocks from Julia's office and waited. I knew the plan. The process server, a professional Marjorie hired, would approach Julia at her workplace at 10 a.m. sharp. I wanted to be nearby when it happened, even if I couldn't watch from inside. At 9:55, I found myself standing in the lobby of the office building across the street from Crest Hill Financial's tower, ostensibly checking my phone but really peering out through the glass doors. My stomach churned with adrenaline. Somewhere up on the 5th floor, Julia was about to receive the shock of her life. At 10:07 by my watch, I saw a woman in a navy blazer and pencil skirt exit Crest Hill's revolving doors, walking briskly despite the winter chill. She was a stranger to me, but I recognized the folder in her hand emblazoned with Marjorie's law firm logo. The server. She was leaving, which meant mission accomplished. Julia had been served the divorce papers and summons. I pictured the scene in my mind. Julia sitting at her desk or in a meeting, being paged for a delivery, only to sign for legal documents from her husband. My heart thumped, imagining her reaction. Confusion, then dawning horror. But that was just the first hit. The next was already in motion. From my car, I sent an email I had drafted to Crest Hill's HR director. I used a throwaway email account under a fake name, but with enough detail that it wouldn't be ignored. The email subject line read, "Urgent, ethics violation, unreported workplace affair." In the body, I succinctly laid out that a senior manager, Eric Sanders, had for months been engaged in an extramarital affair with a direct report, Julia, I listed her full name. I wrote that I had evidence including dated photographs of them entering hotels during work hours, which indicated not just moral impropriety, but potential misuse of company time and resources. I attached a few low-resolution, but clearly incriminating photos as proof. The tone was that of a concerned insider or whistleblower. I kept it anonymous but credible, referencing that the affair was common knowledge to several colleagues. A bit of a bluff, but I suspected gossip might have picked up some vibes already. Finally, I CC'd the general counsel of the company and the VP of operations, people sure to take note if HR didn't. I hit send. A surge of triumph washed over me. There was no undoing it now. The gears were in motion. Julia's personal life and professional life were both about to come crashing down around her. I went through the rest of my workday in a haze of focus and anxiety. Part of me wondered what was happening in Julia's office after the papers were served. She didn't text or call me at all that day, which was unusual. Typically, she'd at least send a quick message about dinner plans or something about Zoe. The silence was telling. She must have been reeling, possibly consulting a lawyer of her own or confronting Eric. I pictured a dozen scenarios. Was she angrily dialing my number and then thinking better of it? Crying in a bathroom stall? Or storming into Eric's office, papers in hand, demanding, "Did you know about this?" Evening came, and I steeled myself for the real confrontation. I picked up Zoe from school as usual, helping her with her homework and keeping our routine normal. I debated whether Zoe should be around for the inevitable fight that was coming. Ideally, I didn't want her to witness it, but I also didn't know when exactly Julia would come home or in what state. I texted Julia around 6 p.m. "Everything okay? Running late?" There was no reply. By 7 p.m., I fed Zoe and got her settled with a TV show, anticipating that when Julia did show up, I'd need to take the conversation somewhere private or send Zoe to her room. I felt tense but oddly calm in my resolve. It was nearly 8 when I heard Julia's car in the driveway. My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. She entered the house, and I immediately noticed how disheveled she looked. Her eyes were red-rimmed as if she'd been crying, and she clutched her handbag and a stack of papers, likely the divorce petition, so hard her knuckles were white. The moment she saw me standing in the living room, she shut the front door and practically threw her bag down. You did this?" Her voice was shrill, incredulous, as she waved the papers at me. I glanced towards the den where Zoe was. I didn't want shouting near her. In a measured tone, I said, "Zoe, honey, could you please go to your room for a bit? Mom and I need to talk." Sensing the tension, my daughter silently nodded and scampered upstairs with her tablet, closing her door. The instant Zoe was out of earshot, Julia exploded. "What the hell is this, Daniel?" she nearly screamed, brandishing the divorce papers like a weapon. "You filed for divorce? For adultery?" The word came out of her mouth with a mix of outrage and panic, as if she still couldn't believe it. I stood my ground, arms folded. Seeing her like this, frantic, desperate, stirred a mix of emotions in me. Part of me felt a sick satisfaction. Another part felt the sting of heartbreak all over again. But I kept my face hard. "That's right," I replied coldly. "I know everything, Julia. The lies, the trips, Eric. All of it." Her face went ashen at the mention of his name. For a second, she looked like she might collapse. She staggered a step back, catching herself on the arm of the sofa. "How?" she stammered. "How could you? How long?" "How long have I known?" I finished for her. "Long enough, longer than you'd think." My voice was icy. I had envisioned this moment for weeks, fantasized about what I'd say. Now that it was happening, The words came out steady and sharp. Chicago, San Francisco, the so-called late nights at work. Did you really think I was that oblivious? She opened her mouth, then closed it, at a loss. Her eyes darted around as if looking for an escape. I, I can explain, she began weakly, tears starting to spill. I gave a short, bitter laugh. Oh, this should be good. By all means, explain what possible explanation there is for sneaking around with your coworker for nearly a year, lying to my face and to our daughter. It wasn't, she choked up, wiping her eyes. It just happened, Dan. I never meant to hurt you. You have to know that. I made a mistake. A mistake, I repeated, voice rising despite myself. The rage I'd kept under such tight control began to flare. A mistake is one night, Julia. A drunken fling, a lapse. This was calculated, repeated betrayal. 10 months at least. Do you think I'm a fool? She flinched at my tone. I'm sorry, she cried, stepping towards me, the papers now clutched to her chest like a lifeline. I'm so sorry. It was never because of you. I don't know. I was stupid and lonely, and Eric paid attention to me, and it just got out of control. Her words tumbled out rapidly, desperation creeping in. I wanted to stop it so many times. Don't give me that, I snapped, taking a step back from her approach. I didn't want her to touch me. You had countless chances to stop, to come clean, but you never did. Even when I asked you point blank. You lied without batting an eye. You had no problem making me feel crazy for suspecting, did you? She shook her head vehemently, tears falling. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I know it sounds absurd now, but I still loved you, love you. I never stopped. Eric, it was never about replacing you. It was a stupid thrill or something. I don't know. She was babbling, voice breaking. I felt a flash of disgust. You have a sick way of showing love, I said quietly. That made her sob harder. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a tug of old empathy. This was the woman I had loved for years, mother of my child, now collapsed onto the sofa, face in her hands, sobbing that she was sorry. Under different circumstances, I might have rushed to comfort her. But not now. Those tears, as far as I was concerned, were for herself. Sorry she got caught. Sorry her little fantasy came crashing down. I let the silence stretch until her sobs abated somewhat. Then I spoke, each word measured. It's too late for apologies. I gave you my trust, and you shredded it. Now we deal with the consequences. She looked up, eyes wild and rimmed red. We can fix this, she pleaded. Please, Dan, we can go to counseling. We can try to mend. I'll quit my job. I'll cut him off completely. Just please, don't do this. Don't throw everything away. Her voice cracked in sheer panic. Think of Zoe. We can at least try for her sake. I felt a hollowness at her words. Now she invokes our daughter. The same daughter she effectively abandoned every time she chose to spend nights with him. I am thinking of Zoe, I said, steel in my voice. She doesn't deserve a broken home, Julia whispered, shaking her head. She didn't deserve a mother who betrayed her family either, but here we are, I retorted. That struck her. She recoiled as if slapped. A moment later, something hardened in her expression. Perhaps she realized begging wasn't swaying me. Her tears subsided, and a glint of anger appeared. Fine. You're hurt and angry. I get that. But do you really need to ruin my life over this? She said, her tone turning accusatory. Serving me papers at work? Announcing adultery for everyone to see? That was cruel, Dan. I lost a major client today because those papers got delivered in the middle of a team meeting. The whole office saw. Her voice rose again, agitated. I cut her off with an incredulous laugh. Cruel? You're lecturing me on cruelty? My voice dropped to a dangerous calm. You have no idea what cruelty is, Julia, but you're about to. She blinked, and I could see fear return. What? What does that mean? She asked nervously. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the back of an armchair, fixing her with a gaze that made her shrink slightly. I mean that the divorce is just the beginning. You didn't think I'd stop there, did you? Her lips parted, confusion and fear mingling. Dan, what did you do? She asked softly, dread in her voice. I felt a cold smile tug at my mouth. By now, HR at Crest Hill has received a detailed account of your activities with Eric. With evidence. Julia's face went utterly pale. Oh my God, she whispered. No, you didn't. I did, I said bluntly. Any second now, if not already, your lover boy will be facing the music, and you along with him. Isn't that how it works? Company policy surely frowns on managers sleeping with subordinates, especially on company time. She stared at me as though I'd grown horns. In her eyes, a mix of betrayal, the irony, and panic. They'll fire me, she breathed. Dan, my job, my career. You should have thought of that before screwing your boss in a hotel on your lunch break. I spat. She stood up abruptly, her hands trembling. How could you? The divorce? Fine, I deserve that. But my job? Do you want to destroy me? It was startling to see her direct anger at me, as if I were the villain. It stoked my own fury. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure you face the consequences. You think you can waltz around wrecking lives and walk away unscathed. This is insane, she gasped. It was private. Not once it crossed into your workplace, it wasn't. I snapped. I'm sure the Crest Hill execs will agree. Do you know in the last few years, multiple CEOs have been ousted for affairs with employees, even consensual ones? Your company won't want a scandal on their hands. She sank back down, seemingly in shock. I continued relentlessly, and if you somehow keep your job, that's fine too. Everyone there will still know what kind of person you and Eric are. Good luck facing them. Tears started spilling anew as the full weight of what I'd done hit her. I'll never work in finance again, she murmured, voice quavering. Even if they don't fire me, I'll be blacklisted. This will ruin my reputation. I felt a pang of something like pity, but I pushed it aside. Should have considered that. My tone was cold, but inside a war was raging. Years of love for this woman battling with the righteous anger of a man betrayed. She looked up at me, eyes shining with tears and fury. And what about Zoe? Do you realize what you're doing to our family? You're not just punishing me, you're hurting her too. That hit a nerve. I stepped around the armchair and pointed a finger at her. Don't you dare try to make this about my actions hurting Zoe. You did this. I'm trying to make sure Zoe has at least one stable parent and a secure life after all this. Or would you rather I had sat quietly while you carried on and let her grow up in a household built on lies? She sobbed. Of course not. I thought I could keep it separate, that it wouldn't affect her. I shook my head, disgusted. Nothing stays separate, Julia. It all bleeds over. You just convinced yourself of whatever you needed so you could keep doing what you wanted. We stood there in tense silence for a few moments, the only sound her uneven breathing. My own heart was hammering from the confrontation. Finally, Julia wiped her face, smearing her mascara. In a small, broken voice, she asked, "Is there anything I can do or say to make you reconsider any of this?" It almost sounded like defeat. I took a long breath. This was the moment where, in some stories, the cheating spouse makes a heartfelt plea that gives the betrayed pause. But I felt no temptation to reconsider. The damage was irreparable. The time for making things right is long past, I said quietly. I gave you a chance. Every day. I gave you a chance to come to me and tell the truth. You never did. Even when I confronted you with small inconsistencies, you doubled down on the lies. So no. This is the path now. She nodded slowly, as if she expected that answer, but had to hear it. I'm sorry, she whispered one last time, staring at the floor. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I laid out terms, my voice businesslike. I'm going to stay in the house for now, for Zoe's sake. You can choose to stay in the guest room or go elsewhere. Perhaps that nice apartment Eric uses. The jab landed. She winced. We'll tell Zoe together tomorrow that we're separating. We don't have to give details, but we will not lie to her about the fact that this is permanent. I want her to start therapy immediately to process this. And as for custody, I will be pursuing primary custody of Zoe. You can have reasonable visitation, assuming you stabilize yourself. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. No, I'm not finished. These divorce papers outline an initial proposal. I'm keeping the house and my pension. You can keep your car and your personal savings. I expect you to agree to no alimony, given your fault in this. She blinked in disbelief. Dan, I don't have a job now. You can't expect— I can and I do, I said sternly. You're educated and employable. You won't starve. And why the hell should I subsidize the woman who betrayed me? I practically growled the last part. You're punishing me, she said softly, voice trembling. Yes, I replied without hesitation. I am. And it's deserved. Her shoulders shook as she silently cried. She looked utterly broken. Once again, a faint instinct to comfort her bubbled up, but I ruthlessly tamped it down. I reminded myself of every night I lay awake torturing myself with suspicions, every lie she told straight to my face, every memory of her with him. I needed that anger now to carry me through. After a minute, she nodded, a tiny motion. I'll stay in the guest room, she murmured, sounding exhausted. At least until we figure out something for Zoe, please. Let's not fight in front of her. I agreed with a curt nod. We had scorched each other enough tonight. Zoe would need calm as much as possible. Julia moved as if to walk towards the stairs, then paused, looking at me with haunted eyes. What you said in the papers about adultery. Will that be public record? People will know? It took me a moment to answer, and when I did, my tone was unapologetic. Yes, it will. I'm not interested in protecting your image, Julia. The truth is the truth. She absorbed that, fresh shame washing over her face. Without another word, she trudged upstairs. A moment later, I heard the guest room door close softly. I stood alone in the living room, adrenaline slowly ebbing and leaving me drained. My marriage was truly over, an emotional battlefield with both of us wounded, but her far more than me in the practical sense. Part of me felt sick, part of me felt vindicated. I went to check on Zoe. She peeked up from her bed as I gently opened her door. Daddy? I heard shouting. Are you and Mom okay? Her voice was small, worried. I forced a warm smile and sat on the edge of her bed. We had a tough talk, sweetie. But you don't need to worry. We both love you very much, okay? No matter what. She nodded and sat up to hug me. I held her tightly, my eyes stinging with the tears I hadn't shed in front of Julia. I hated that Zoe had to be dragged into any of this. She was the one pure good thing to come out of our marriage, and I was determined to protect her. After Zoe lay back down, I sat with her until she drifted to sleep, my hand gently stroking her hair. My mind was already spinning ahead, how exactly we'd explain this separation to her tomorrow, how to help her cope. That, at least, I would not leave to chance or use as a weapon. Zoe's well-being had to be priority. Later that night, as I lay in the master bedroom alone, I stared at the empty space in the bed where Julia once slept beside me. The house was silent. Somewhere down the hall, my wife, no, my soon-to-be ex-wife, was probably crying into a pillow or lying sleepless in regret. And somewhere across town, another home might be exploding with anger and pain once Eric's wife opened that package I sent. I wondered if he even knew yet what was coming for him. Perhaps HR had pulled him into a meeting today, or maybe it had happened tomorrow. Either way, his perfect little world was about to be as ruined as Julia's. As I closed my eyes, I didn't feel the peace I'd hoped to feel at this stage. Instead, I felt like a soldier after battle, exhausted, wounds still raw. But at least I had the grim assurance that the campaign was going in my favor. I had won this round, decisively. The next battles, divorce negotiations, custody hearings, still lay ahead, but I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to relent. 3 months later, I found myself in a courthouse conference room, finalizing the legal end of my marriage. The winter holidays had come and gone in a blur of awkwardness and raw emotions. But now, in early spring, things were finally settling into a new reality. Julia sat across the table from me, alongside her attorney. She looked pale and drawn, a far cry from the confident, put-together professional she once was. I focused on the stack of documents before me, our mediated settlement agreement. In the end, things had gone largely in my favor, and not by accident. Initially, Julia had intended to fight for more. She wanted half of the house's equity, spousal support, and split custody of Zoe. Perhaps it was her lawyer's strategy to start high, but those demands evaporated quickly when Marjorie deposed her. Under oath, with the threat of our voluminous evidence hanging in the air, Julia conceded on almost every point, especially after Marjorie calmly presented copies of receipts and the PI's photos, all of which would become part of the court record if we went to trial. Julia's lawyer all but advised her to surrender to avoid further public humiliation. So here we were. I would keep the house, my retirement accounts, and full legal and physical custody of Zoe. Julia agreed to supervised visitation initially, until the court was satisfied that Zoe was comfortable, then moving to a standard visitation schedule every other weekend. But in practice, Zoe had been so hurt and confused by her mother's sudden fall from grace that she hadn't wanted to spend much time with Julia at first. We were easing into it with therapy. There was no alimony. Julia formally waived it, partly out of acknowledgement of her fault, partly because she knew any judge would likely deny it anyway due to the circumstances. The only financial tie remaining was a modest child support payment from her. Though given her unemployment, I doubted I'd ever see much of it. That part I didn't care about. I earned enough to support Zoe on my own. Julia also agreed to reimburse the marital estate for specific expenditures on her affair. In lieu of cash, since she had little, she forfeited her claim to some joint investments which we split unevenly in my favor. In effect, I recouped the money she had blown on Eric's jaunts. Seeing that clause written in black and white, listing the hotel stays, flights, and pricey dinners she splurged on while betraying me, had given me a grim satisfaction. The meeting was brief. Julia barely spoke except to answer the judge's few procedural questions with a meek, "Yes, Your Honor." When the judge declared us divorced, I felt an unexpected mix of relief and sadness. It was over. The woman who once was my partner in life was now legally a stranger, with only our child keeping us in orbit. Afterward, as we all rose to leave, Julia approached me cautiously while our lawyers chatted by the door. She was wringing her hands. "Dan," she began softly. I looked at her waiting. Her eyes were moist, pleading. I wanted to say thank you for, not dragging this out longer than it had to be, and for being decent about Zoe and everything. Decent. I wondered if she'd always see me as cruel for how I'd exposed her, or if part of her recognized that I'd actually held back from far worse things I could have done. Either way, I didn't particularly care in that moment. I gave a curt nod. "I'm doing what's best for Zoe, that's all." She wiped the corner of her eye. "Right. I hope one day you can maybe forgive me a little. For her sake, if nothing else." I didn't respond to that directly. "Take care of yourself, Julia," was all I managed. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the closest to cordial I felt capable of. She opened her mouth as if to say more, but then simply turned and walked away, out of the conference room and out of the marriage that she had destroyed. I watched her go, feeling mostly hollow inside. Perhaps in time that would heal. As for Eric Sanders, his downfall had been swift and brutal. The HR investigation launched by my anonymous tip concluded before Christmas. Both he and Julia were found to have violated company policy. He was indeed her superior, and their tryst on company trips sealed it. Eric was fired within days, escorted out of Crest Hill's offices just after New Year's. Julia, who had already been on leave following the scandal, was offered a choice to resign or be terminated. She resigned, though it hardly made a difference to her career prospects. Word travels fast in financial circles. By now, everyone knew why the Golden Boy senior manager and the up-and-coming project manager were gone so suddenly. Eric's personal life fared no better. The day after I sent that package, I heard from Frank, who still had a source or two keeping tabs, that Eric's wife had indeed filed for divorce. Apparently, she wasted no time. Having photographic proof left little room for Eric's denials. I later learned through the grapevine that his wife took their 2 kids and moved back to her hometown, and Eric quietly sold their big suburban house amid the divorce. At the office holiday party that year, which I did not attend, of course, rumors ran wild. A former colleague of Julia's who felt sympathetic towards me shared that the gossip was merciless. Some employees had suspected something between Julia and Eric. They'd flirted perhaps a bit too openly after a few drinks at previous work events. When HR dropped the hammer, it simply confirmed what many had thought. I took no direct joy in imagining them as the subjects of whispered conversations and judgmental stares. But I didn't feel pity either. They'd earned their disgrace. One interesting tidbit. In a desperate attempt to save his own skin during the HR inquiry, Eric apparently tried to claim that Julia had seduced him, even hinting that she was primarily at fault. That didn't save him, of course, but it told me all I needed about his character. When the chips were down, he didn't hesitate to throw her under the bus. I'm not sure if she knows he did that, but either way, any romantic illusion between them has surely shattered. Last I heard, Eric left town. Rumor was he moved to another state seeking work in a smaller firm, though with his tarnished reputation, it won't be a corner office job, that's for sure. As for Julia, rebuilding her life has been an uphill battle. In the months since everything came out, She's been living in a small rental apartment across town. She's still looking for steady work. When prospective employers call Crest Hill for references, she faces awkward questions. She's confessed to me, during one of our limited civil exchanges about scheduling for Zoe, that she's even considered changing industries entirely, just to escape the shadow of her mistake. Her eyes were full of regret and weariness as she said it. I offered a neutral, "I hope you find something suitable," and left it at that. I didn't gloat. There was no need. Her own choices were punishment enough. Socially, the fallout was significant for her too. We had a small circle of mutual friends from our neighborhood and school connections. When the news quietly spread that I'd filed for divorce due to her affair, I never made a public announcement, but people talk. A few of those friends reached out to me with support. Meanwhile, Julia became notably absent from gatherings. A close friend of hers told me in confidence that Julia felt too ashamed to show her face at PTA meetings or neighborhood barbecues for a while. Her parents were devastated. They had treated me like a son for years, and when they learned of her infidelity, I left it to Julia to tell them, but I suspect she downplayed the details. They called me, emotional and apologetic. Her mother in particular cried on the phone, telling me she couldn't understand what had gotten into Julia and that she was so sorry for what I'd been through. I actually found myself comforting her, assuring her that I'd be okay, and that I'd always be part of their granddaughter's life. It's been awkward with them, but we're on decent terms. They love Zoe dearly, and I won't stand in the way of that relationship. If anything, they've been extra kind to me, perhaps out of guilt for their daughter's actions. And Zoe, sweet Zoe, has been incredibly strong through all of this. We gently told her after the initial blow-up that Mom and Dad were going to live apart. We framed it as Mom made a big mistake that hurt Dad. And although Dad forgave her as a person, it changed things between us as a couple. We reassured her repeatedly that none of it was her fault, and that we both loved her more than anything. She was quiet for a long time after hearing this, and in the following weeks, she vented her confusion and hurt mostly to her therapist. Thank goodness for child counselors. I know she was angry at her mother deep down. Children have a keen sense of betrayal, too. There were times she'd come home from a short visit with Julia and just hug me, tears in her eyes. I never prodded her about those visits, but I suspected Zoe saw the shell of the woman her mother had become, and didn't know how to reconcile it with the mom she'd loved all her life. In time, I hope Julia and Zoe will mend their bond. I encourage Zoe to see her mom, and I encourage Julia to be the best parent she can be during their time together. But I won't lie. A part of me is relieved that, at least for now, Zoe prefers our home and my presence. It means I succeeded in giving her stability when her world was tilted. As for me, life moves on. In the absence of marital strife, I poured my energy into my work and my daughter. I was promoted to head my team earlier this year, and the challenging projects have kept me happily busy. When I come home, it's to a more peaceful household, even if it's one less populated. I cook dinner with Zoe, we help each other with chores, and we talk openly about our days. There's laughter again, genuine laughter, not the forced pleasantries that had characterized those last months with Julia. I won't pretend I haven't had dark moments. There are nights when loneliness creeps in, and I miss the companionship I once had. Or rather, the companionship I thought I had. Trusting someone new will be difficult, but I'm not closing myself off to the idea forever. In fact, a couple of weekends ago, I went to a barbecue hosted by one of those mutual friends. Julia wasn't there, of course. But another guest, a friend of a friend, spent a long time chatting with me by the grill. Her name is Rachel, a warm-hearted school administrator, recently divorced herself. We talked about everything from craft beer to the funny antics of our kids. She has a son in middle school, too. It was nice. I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. We exchanged numbers at the end of the day. I haven't called her yet. I'm taking things slow. But knowing that I can feel that spark again is a sign that I'm healing. Sometimes, when I reflect on it all, I'm struck by how quickly and utterly life can change. In the span of a year, I went from a blissfully unaware husband to a man who systematically dismantled the lies around him. It's almost frightening, the things you discover you're capable of when pushed to the edge. I engineered the downfall of someone I once deeply loved. It leaves a bittersweet taste. But then I look at Zoe's smiling face as she practices her softball swing in the yard. Or I sit in my quiet living room with a glass of wine and a clear conscience, and I remind myself, it had to be done. Justice in its own way was served. Before all this, I used to think of vengeance as a nasty, vengeful business that only hardened people pursued. I never saw myself as one of those people. I was easygoing Dan, the devoted family man. But betrayal has a way of forging a new version of you. I found a part of myself I didn't know existed, a part capable of cold strategy and ruthless follow-through. I'm not proud of everything I felt during those dark days, but I also don't regret holding Julia and Eric accountable. They played stupid games and won stupid prizes, as the saying goes. In the end, there was no dramatic reconciliation, no gentle easing back into the life we had. That life was gone the moment they decided their secret mattered more than their integrity. What remains now is a new life. One where I raise my daughter in an honest home, where I can sleep at night not wondering what lies are being spun behind my back. And for Julia and Eric, what remains are the lessons of their choices. Lessons paid for with their careers, their finances, and their good names. As I finish writing these reflections, my therapist suggested journaling, and I have to admit it helps to put it all into words. I feel a sense of closure. This chapter of my life, tumultuous and painful as it was, is finally ending. Outside my window, the first blossoms of spring are appearing, and the evening light lasts a bit longer each day. It feels fitting, like I'm stepping out of a long, dark winter. I don't know what the future holds. Perhaps I'll find love again down the line. Perhaps not. For now, I have my daughter, my livelihood, and my self-respect intact. I won't say I won in the simplistic sense. Divorce isn't a game where anyone truly wins. But I came out standing tall while those who wronged me fell hard. In that regard, yes, I suppose I did win. One thing is certain. I will never be the same naive man I was, but maybe that's okay. I've learned my own strength, and I've learned that when the worst happens, I can survive it, and even ensure that those who hurt me face the consequences they deserve. It's a hard lesson, but a powerful one. As I close this narrative, I take a deep breath and let it out, feeling the weight finally lift. The storm has passed, the damage is done, and the scars are healing. Justice has been dealt, and now it's time to embrace whatever comes next, with clear eyes and a resolute heart. I am moving on,